Hi everybody, my name is Shanice and welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be letting you guys know my 2025 TBR for what I call Reading Across Latin America, which honestly is the book challenge that I give myself every year that I am the most excited to curate and to share with you guys, and also the one that I am usually the proudest of. Essentially what I do, although I think it's pretty obvious, is I choose around 12, this year I'm choosing 10 books from Latin America written by Latin American authors. If they are written in Spanish or Portuguese, I will read them in Spanish or Portuguese. The French, I'm not so confident in, so I do not read the French in French. I only read it in English. And already you might be thinking, French, what is she talking about? That's not Latin American. Well, the truth is, the term Latin American is highly contested and there is not one definition. When I started this challenge for myself, I picked one and I'm running with it, and I have been ever since then. I kind of follow the Britannica model, and before I let you know what that consists of, like which countries and cultures make up Latin America according to Britannica, let me just run down a few definitions of the term and you will see just how complicated this is, and honestly how nonsensical it is to be using a term like this to describe like tons of different countries with different peoples and cultures and ethnicities and races and languages. Like, it's a little bit nonsense, but for the purposes of this challenge, and you know, because we live in a reality where people like myself identify as Latinos, then it is what it is. But here are some common definitions of the term Latin American. One of them is actually pretty much the Britannica model. It says that Latin America is comprised of countries in the Americas which speak a Romance language. So a Latin-derived language, French, Spanish, or Portuguese. This would typically include Mexico, islands of the Caribbean, and countries in Central and South America. In other words, the term Latin American would be used for peoples who live in countries that were once colonized by the Spanish, the French, or the Portuguese. And even though Puerto Rico is not a sovereign nation, it would be included in this definition. Another definition is one that says Latin America consists of all the countries south of the United States, which would mean that you would have to include all of the Guyanas, so French Guyana, Guyana, and Suriname, the Anglophone Caribbean, so like Barbados, the Bahamas, also Belize, the Francophone Caribbean, like Haiti, as well as the Dutch Caribbean. This definition sees a common socioeconomic culture between all of those countries, a similar history, specifically a similar colonial history. Yet another definition focuses solely on the Iberian language speaking countries. So any country in the Americas where the people speak either Spanish or Portuguese, and in which the dominant religion is Roman Catholicism, thanks to, of course, colonization. So this would include Puerto Rico, this includes the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, this obviously does not include the Dutch-speaking nations, any English-speaking nation, or any French-speaking nations. And so finally, the Britannica model is similar to one of the other models that I explained, whereby Latin America is comprised of nations south of the United States that speak Spanish, French, or Portuguese. Now, it's not a perfect definition, as none of the other ones are, because why just south of the United States? Like, why doesn't anything above the United States or part of the United States count? If we are saying this term defines peoples who were once colonized or who speak a Romance language, you know, why isn't Quebec or Louisiana, etc. part of this? I don't know. This is why the definition makes no sense. No definition makes sense. The Britannica model specifically names the countries, which was helpful, and so the countries that it claims fit its definition of Latin American include Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, French Guyana, Paraguay, Peru, Suriname, Uruguay, Venezuela, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti, and the dependencies and constituent entities of Guadeloupe, Martinique, Puerto Rico, Saint-Barthélemy, and Saint-Martin. Those are, I believe, the 33 countries whose literature I want to get more acquainted with. I first decided to create this challenge to try to diversify my own canon of literature from Latin America. You know, typically when people want to diversify their reading and they want to read more Latin authors, they go to Gabriel Garcia Marquez or Pablo Neruda or huge names, which I think, yes, everyone should read, but they fall short of like exploring different cultures within those cultures. You know, typically when you choose the Borges, you're actually choosing like very elite classes of people, and nothing wrong with that necessarily. You know, they're brilliant writers, but you know, there are swaths of other peoples within those countries too that I think deserve to be read. I wanted to sort of challenge myself to find more underrepresented authors within Latin America that would be like fabulous discoveries for me as a lover of books and someone who just wants to learn more about the supposed identity that defines me. So for this year, I've chosen 10 books, and let's start with the book that I read in January. And actually, this book was written first in English. I'm reading the Spanish translation. The Spanish translation is called Negocios, and this is by Junot Diaz. And he was born in the DR, moved to New Jersey, my state, when he was very little. And this is Diaz's debut short story collection, the majority of which he wrote when he was in his MFA at Cornell. If you have ever read The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, the main character of that book, Junior, is the main character of, I think, half of the stories here. And so we kind of see his story in a different light. We see him still struggling with his father abandoning his family, his siblings, his mother, and see his mother's struggle to live as an immigrant in the US, as well as Junior's own struggles as an immigrant in the US. The other half of the collection also features Latino, specifically Dominican young men who struggle with just coming of age in the US and trying to fall in love but failing at communicating with young girls. So yeah, all coming of age stories centered on Latino boys. And in February, I read another Junot Diaz book, his second short story collection, Así es como la pierdes, and this was again written in English, but I'm reading the Spanish translation of it, which is kind of unique, I guess. This features 9 short stories, and it's insane because 7 of them were first published in The New Yorker. I mean, I know The New Yorker publishes well-established authors as well as up-and-coming authors, although they prefer the former rather than the latter for most of their weekly publications. But to publish like most of a collection in The New Yorker is kind of insane. But this has been praised more than I think any of Diaz's books, and he is someone who won the Pulitzer. So my thesis advisor highly recommended this book. I know Diaz is a bit of a controversial figure lately, but I guess I personally want to see what this book is about, not ignoring what he's done, or what he's been accused of doing. But yeah, in this book, we do get a few more stories from Junior's perspective. It talks about what it means to live in the diaspora, as well as being kind of in between cultures, similar to Negocios. This one is semi-autobiographical. I think a lot of Junior is basically Junot Diaz. Alright, then in March and April, I'm going to read one book. I've given myself 2 months because this book is in Portuguese. Now, I can read some Portuguese, but I've never read a full book in Portuguese. So this is going to be a challenge, but I'm excited to read this. This was on my TBR before, and obviously I failed to read it then. Without further ado, my March and April pick is Don Casmurro, and this is by Machado de Assis. My plan is to listen to this as an audiobook. I found one in Portuguese online, so I think I'm gonna read that first, listen to it first, and then once I kind of grasp it a little bit more, because I'm better at listening than I am at reading Portuguese, but once I listen to it, I'm gonna properly sit down and go through it. This has been translated into English, so if worse comes to worse, I guess I will switch to the English, but I'm pretty sure I'm not going to need that. So what can I say about this book? Our narrator, Bento, but he goes by the nickname Don Casmurro, and he is a very jealous husband. This is written as a fictional memoir, as Bento's fictional memoir, and so it kind of intersperses dark humor and satire in here. Bento is an unreliable narrator, as to be expected, and he's essentially trying to piece together his entire life, the two ends of his life. So his childhood until his present day. He's trying to make sense of everything that has happened to him. There are Shakespearean allusions, intertextuality, irony. This has been lauded as a masterpiece, not just of Brazilian literature, but of international literature. Am I being too ambitious? Maybe, but I'm telling you, this is the year I'm finally going to do it. I'm finally going to read this. Pretty much every Brazilian book that I read is phenomenal. So yeah, I feel like this is going to be fantastic. All right, then for the month of May, I'm choosing a book from French Guiana. This is a book I honestly had never heard of until I made this TBR, which is why this is so exciting. This is called The Bastards, and it's by Bertin Juminer, and this was translated from French to English by Keith Q. Warner, who also provided the introduction of this book. So I'm gonna read the synopsis from the back because, like I said, I really don't know much of anything about this novel. So it says here, this is a novel of education, social, political, racial, and medical. The protagonist is Collective, a group of medical students from French Guiana at the University of Montpellier, France, who learn that what separates them as Caribbean people from their French and African counterparts. Juminer characterizes the three principal types of men drawn together in the struggle for emancipation: those who sooner or later will opt for violence, those who, by their sterling example, prefer to work patiently in the socio-professional arena in order to instill a certain moral and civic sense in their countrymen, and finally, those who wear their bourgeois legacy like a curse and will be ready to try anything, including terrorism, to prove that they are not enemies of the people. I love post-colonial literature. This is that. And again, other than the synopsis, I don't know anything about this, and I just want to go into this blind. This will be my very first book from French Guiana, and I'm really excited about this. I have a good feeling that this is going to be, you know, intellectually stimulating and potentially a favorite. Then in the month of June, I am reading a book from Uruguay, and this is called Mugre Rosa. This is by Fernanda Trias. What I know is that this centers around a woman who lives around a ravaged port city in a dystopian world where people seem to only be able to eat pink slime. There is environmental upheaval, there are strong winds, everything is a mess. There's a lot of death, a lot of illnesses going about. There's a plague. She has to take care of her dying mother as well as her ex-husband and a boy that she nannies, and basically her world is falling apart, and we follow her as she tries to find some balance. I read online that this is actually pretty humorous and a little bit hopeful because we see the protagonist find the positivity and she finds resilience within herself to manage with all the chaos around her, which, you know, I think is something maybe we can all sort of relate to right now, wherever you are in the world, unfortunately. Next in the month of July is another book that was previously on my TBR, but I never got to it until this year. This is called Mandíbula, and it's by Mónica Ojeda. This is a novel from Ecuador. Let me read to you the superb blurb or the synopsis on the back because this is fantastic. Let me read from my computer It says, Fernanda and Annalise are so close they are practically sisters, a double image, inseparable. So how does Fernanda end up bound on the floor of a deserted cabin, held hostage by one of her teachers and estranged from Annalise? When Fernanda, Annalise, and their friends from the Delta Bilingual Academy convene after school, Annalise leads them in a thrilling but increasingly dangerous ritual to a rhinestone Dior-scented drag queen god of her own invention. Even more perilous is the secret Annalise and Fernanda share, rooted in a dare in which violence meets love. Meanwhile, their literature teacher, Miss Clara, who is obsessed with imitating her dead mother, struggles to preserve her deteriorating sanity. Each day, she edges nearer to a total break with reality, interweaving pop culture references and horror concepts drawn from Herman Melville, H.P. Lovecraft, and anonymous creepypastas. Mandibula, or Jawbone, as the translated book in English is titled, is an ominous multivocal novel that explores the terror inherent in the pure potentiality of adolescence and the fine line between desire and fear. Seems like an academic horror book, which I'm in for. I am also all in for my August pick, which is called Las Malas by Camila Sosa Villada, and this is from Argentina. So the author is actually an actress as well, and this is her debut novel. This is about a group of trans women who work as prostitutes in Sarmiento Park. Supposedly it's kind of autobiographical, but not totally. And there's also, interestingly, a TV show adaptation in the works created by Armando Bo, and he co-wrote a bunch of things, including the movie Beautiful, Birdman, El Presidente, Animal, and a bunch of other things. It seems for the protagonist, we kind of bounce back and forth between her childhood when she was a boy and her present adulthood as a prostitute in Sarmiento Park. A book that focuses on a part of Argentina that you wouldn't necessarily get if you were only reading Borges. Then for the month of September, I am choosing a book that was also on a previous TBR. As you can see, I fail a lot with these challenges, but it's okay because I keep going, I keep trying. And this time I will succeed. This is I, Tituba, Black Witch of Salem. This is by Maurice Condé, translated by Richard Philcox from French to English. This is a fictionalized version of the tale, the real life tale of Tituba, who was one of the first people accused of witchcraft in the Salem witch trials. In this book, she is biracial, black and white. It seems in history and real life, she was actually indigenous from South America. She was a slave to a preacher, of course, named Samuel Parris. There is a slight crossover in here with the events of The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Tituba at one point interacts with Hester Prynne. So historically, we don't actually know much about Tituba, but Condé in here is trying to obviously give her a voice, break the silence of her upbringing, her life, and give her a hero's tale. I've never read a Condé before, but when I was in grad school, she was highly recommended by so many professors, so I have high hopes for this. The book that I'm reading in October is from Puerto Rico, and it's called Caparazones, and it is by Yolanda Arroyo Pizarro. And this is a novel, a short novel, about Nessa, who upon becoming a mother kind of loses sight of her own life, which seems to be falling apart before her very eyes. She is an investigative journalist, and typically she goes to dangerous locales to cover global warming, animal cruelty, like experiments on animals for the purposes of science, also turtle extinction in the Caribbean. She happens to fall in love with Alexia, who's a photographer who is addicted to feng shui and has extrasensory perception. Weird, just weird character traits for both of these women. They end up in an affair. All I know, all the book tells me, all the synopses tell me is that it gets them into serious situations. So not offering me much in terms of like what the plot is about, but it seems to be a book about fighting for one's civil liberties. Very topical, very timely, just maybe hitting a little too close to home here, but I'm interested to see how she packs all of this story into a fairly short novel. And then the last book I will be reading is one that I'm going to be reading in November and December, and that is called Mamita Yunay by Carlos Luis Fallas. This is from Costa Rica. This is another semi-autobiographical book, kind of based on the author's time working in a banana plantation. And the book covers the protests from the workers against the United Fruit Company, and the ills that befell Costa Ricans because of the company, Panamanians, the indigenous peoples around the factory. The author was a communist activist, and he said the book was for the revolution more than anything else. And the book also doesn't shy away from criticizing the US for its contributions to Latin American squander, specifically in Costa Rica here. And this book was referenced in a book by Pablo Neruda, which was called Canto General, which I have not read, but it was a fun fact. All right, and those were the 10 exciting novels that I'm going to be reading this year, part of my Reading Across Latin America book challenge. Check out the other videos that I did for previous years. I'm very proud of this list that I've curated. I'm very excited to just learn more about all of these cultures and hopefully discover a new favorite. I think these books range, in terms of tone. I did choose some heavy books that criticize topical issues, but I'm kind of in that mood for the foreseeable future, let's be honest. And I think literature has always been a great way to try to make sense of these issues and what's happening in the real world around us, and is a good way for all of us to form community around commonality. So thank you so much for watching. Please comment down below which Latin American books you hope to read this year. It doesn't have to be anything on this list, but I'm really excited to see what you all have to say. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Bye.